Good evening. I'd like to begin by thanking UMBC, the Department of Africana Studies, for inviting me to present this August lecture. And during my trip here, I've been ruminating and wondering what kind of reception I would have. And I have to say that from the moment I got to Baltimore, other than the rain that met me, it's been a wonderful evening. And I will do my best to live up both to the reputation of this distinguished lecture that you have, as well as the confidence that you've reposed in me. I would like to confer with the technology people so that I know how to move my slides. While waiting for them to come, I'll kind of try to catch up on some other tidbits. Part of the lecture that I'll be giving tonight is tied to a project that has been ongoing in my university, Binghamton University. We've been having a series of conversations and lectures, both on the large topic of the African diaspora. In 1999, we published a book focusing on the first African diaspora in the Americas. And this year, we came up with another one, which is titled The New African Diaspora. And this is just hot off the press. And that's because we realized that the older diaspora is being replenished in ways by the new diaspora, and some of the issues that the new diaspora is bringing complicates the cultural environment, both in the United States and other parts of the world. In this particular anthology, I had focused on 3 women artists, one from Ethiopia, the other from Haiti, and the last from Nigeria. The 3 women have different media, work in different media and in different techniques. 2 are painters, 1 works in animation. But tonight, I'm going to move further out and look at some of the women who have been traveling the world as artists and as mothers. And also look at the achievements they have made in their different areas. 2 of the artists I will be looking at live in the United Kingdom. And the whole idea is to begin to have a wider appreciation of what the African diaspora means. Not necessarily centered in the Americas, but African diaspora as a global construct, because what we do know is that Africans are a global people. They are found in different parts of the world. So what better way to reinforce that particular vision than to see what is happening in other parts of the world? And while we focus on that issue, I also take a lot of pride in the path that the person for whom this lecture is named, W.E.B, DuBois, died as a Ghanaian citizen. And it's interesting that when the debate was going on with regards to emigration, and Marcus Garvey was propounding returned back to Africa, W.E. DuBois took a different stance. And then later in life, he was the one who went back to Africa, made it his home, died there, and became part of the continent. In a counter movement, those in the continent, thanks to some of the political issues and political changes that have occurred in the Senate and in the House of Representatives through the Immigration and Refugees Act, are able to come over here voluntarily in the same way that W.E. Du Bois voluntarily went and made Ghana his home. So we begin to see these migrations across borders, across countries, by African peoples in ways that many of us didn't even conceptualize 50, 70 years ago. We'll try to sort out our technological glitches. In this particular lecture, the 3 African diaspora women artists I'm looking at were originally from Nigeria. They currently reside in United Kingdom and one in the United States. Chinwe Chukwuogoroy is a member of the British Empire and is an order of chivalry established in June 4th, 1917 by King George V in Britain. The order consists of 5 classes, and Chinwe Chukwuogoroy as the member is in the lowest rung. The next artist I will be looking at is Sokari Douglas Camp, and she's a commander of the British Empire. These are women who left their homes at a time that women are not even conceptualized to be able to achieve much, and they are not only making great strides, they are also being inducted into the most privileged orders and societies in the areas, in the countries in which they live. The third person I am looking at is Nnenna Okore, and she lives in the United States. They came to their various destinations in different ways. Chukwuogoroy arrived in England in 1975 for college education. 5 years after the end of the Biafran Civil War, and after completing her high school education, Sokari Douglas Camp, by her own description, was an air mail child. She was airmailed to England for schooling by British anthropologist Robin Horton, her deceased sister's husband, and then airmailed back to Nigeria for holidays. Nnenna Okore came to the United States for her master's in fine arts and for both educational and professional opportunities. Their reasons for immigrations are not tied to the oppressiveness of family life, nor did they immigrate to get away from the dysfunctions of home or from abusive spouses. All these women voluntarily became permanent residents in their homes. Chukwuogoroy and Douglas Camp married British citizens, became mothers, and raised their children in their new homes, while Okore is still a single and professional artist. My main preoccupation is how does a woman who becomes a mother create? What are the sources of the inspiration, and what is it that she sets out to do, both professionally as an artist, but also philosophically as a person? African women's subjectivity, including that of her immigrant sisters, are often painted in broad, brooding colors of subordination. She's represented, quote, as voiceless and often rightless in her husband's family, except for what accrues to her through her children, end quote. And this is by Omolara Ogundipe Leslie. The novels of the first generation of African women writers, notably Mariam Maba, Buchi Emecheta, Ama Ataitu, and Flora Nwapa, further lend legitimacy to Molara's Ogundipe Leslie's assertions. With homes, particularly marital homes, as locations of alienation, displacement, and oppressive strangers, literary theorists and the reading public mentally sketch crude portraits that project ignorance and lack of assertiveness on adult African women. Yet, the Situanism thesis of then Ogundipe Leslie and the narrative portrayals of the aforementioned authors are critically nuanced literary works that are character-focused and not necessarily emblematic of all African women in their various communities. They capture interesting moments in the lives of some fictional women, but not the range of responses that women in Igbo, Akan, Wolof, or Yoruba societies are capable of or would necessarily offer. Ogundipe, as she is now called, offers a different analysis of women after a revelatory meeting she and other professional middle-class women held with Iya lodgers. And the Iya lodgers are women traders in the city of Ibadan. The same can be said of the women authors who are aware of women that defy their narrative of the African female victim. So when we cast the African woman in a timid, long-suffering template, as Ramatulaye in So Long a Letter and Nwego in Joys of Motherhood, and not on the agency-prone characters of the assertive female challengers, inevitably, we create a problematic template in which African women are understood and characterized when they leave their particular environment. The point being that within their own locale, the character sketches in the novels do not drive the ways women and society engage women. But outside of their location, in a different part of the world, what drives the perception and understanding of African women inevitably come from the novels that people read, which oftentimes do not tell the full story. Indeed, it is true that authors intend readers to identify with the protagonists of their novels, given that that is the lens in which the story is told. They do not intend, for one, to believe that the identification becomes the sole template for characterizing and understanding African women, or do they intend for this to be the sole ways of projecting gender attributes into any society, or for making moral assertions about women in those societies as a whole? Indeed, within these cultures, those novels graphically engage. Nobody reads the character of women from those novels as they do within the global context in which these novels are read, analyzed, and interpreted. The women who are often negotiating complex life influences against the plate of good Christian women, or a good Muslim woman, or a good wife to some pathologically twisted male, becomes the lens for engaging African women in diaspora. The upshot is that the larger United States or Canada or United Kingdom mistake the initial disorienting conditions of immigration to an alien society for the character of African women immigrants. Let's step for the moment and reverse this negative reading. We can do it by looking at how these women are able to parent well-adjusted, high-achieving children in economically deprived or economically moderate circumstances in a racially hostile condition they find themselves. Some have done this quite successfully, even when they inadvertently end up living in low-income, crime-infested urban areas with terrible public schools. The issue for our perspective is not what they do and how they do it. Rather, it is how their act of doing shatters the myth of the timid, ignorant woman and pointedly exposes not only the falsity of the lens, but the refusal to actually see that many of these immigrant women are highly educated, assertive women that by US Census Bureau records are the most educated of all immigrants entering the United States, and certainly more educated than the native population. Though most of us speak with an accent, as every human being does, the fact that they do not speak or sound like the regular American, English man or woman, Canadian, does not mean that many of them are not highly trained in their different areas of endeavors. Even as they parent their children in the country of expatriation, some are simultaneously retooling their skills or retaining in a different professional arena Some are simultaneously retraining their skills and engaging in different professional areas in their new immigrant homes. The relevance of this analysis to the topic of this lecture is that it reveals the primary objective of immigrant women artists, many of whom are mothers. Their rationale for directing their creative manners in the manner they do and undertaking radical life transformations so that they seek to create a better home in their new country. Now, what I like to do, could you go back? Okay. The British comedian Gina Yashiro her sketch of the fictional Mrs. Masquerade reminds many Nigerians, both at home and the diaspora, of the mother figure that we know, fear, and come to love later in life. Born in Finsbury Park, London, to Nigerian immigrant parents, Yashiro took the British comedy world by storm and in a few short years became a sought-after comic with appearances in television, radio, and the big screen. In fact, she's now presently living in Hollywood. Her biting commentary of Nigerian immigrant mothers vividly captured the will, tenacity, and readiness of many African immigrant women to battle any external forces which may be embarrassing to their children as they wage their battles. Yashiro invites us into the intimate life of these mothers to see that their unapologetic, no-nonsense actions publicly demand their children to perform at their optimal peak while simultaneously pushing back a system that fails to challenge them enough. Their actions have generally proved effective in ensuring children's present and future successes, whatever the odds they encounter later in life. So these immigrant parents engage in actions that bring about change. Later, we will be focusing on the kind of change and the direction of the change they want to bring about. But for the moment, let's watch these two clips on Mrs. Masquerade.
Good. How's my daughter doing?
Femi is settling down very well.
I don't care about her declarations. I Vietnamese art teacher. Yes, she has a wonderful talent, and one of her paintings has just been accepted into the Tate Gallery, so that...
I didn't send her all the way to this school to prepare for her to draw. You are no use to me. Where are the proper teachers? Mr. Head of Biology, I'm furious with you. Why has Fumi not been entered for the NF?
Good evening, Mrs. Masquerade. As for Exam 12, we feel she has plenty of time to be working towards those goals.
Plenty of time. Do you know how much the school is costing me? I am working 4 jobs. 2 of those are full-time, and I rented a flat above a chip shop so that I am within the catchment area. So I do not have plenty of time. I'm allergic to sapellos. Now, I have a copy here of Fumi's report, and it says she has little interest in biology as she has an abject fear of blood. What is this?
Yes, it's true. Fumi does not enjoy biology as much as she likes French, Latin, history of art.
My daughter is a very clever girl. She has to be pushed. Push her! Push her!
As you know, Mr. Masquerade, the children will do your options next year. And Fumi and I have been talking about her dropping biology in favour.
Mr. Norman, I think you're not understanding me. My daughter will not be dropping biology. She's going to be a doctor. She's going to have a surgery on her street where she will meet and marry another doctor. She will have a big mansion with a house on the grounds for me where I will have a Nissan Micra for my own use. So you see, you have to overcome this fear of blood. You cannot have a surgeon saying, oh, I'm a little bit crazy. Can you do these dishes yourself? It's not professional.
She perhaps let us be the judge of what's...
Judge, you... Get up for me. We're leaving this place. We are going to little mother and daughter out here. We are going to give blood. Come on.
Second one.
Sit down, Mrs. Masquerade.
No, you sit down, I will stand.
Mrs. Masquerade, for the last month, the only lessons Fumi has attended have been biology lessons.
Yes, that's because Fumi is going to be a doctor. What she needs from you is biology, biology, biology. And in the afternoon, more biology.
Look, I agree biology is important, but as part of the broader curriculum, Fumi needs to study a range of subjects: maths, English, Latin.
Latin. None of her patients will be from this Latin land, or from England for that matter. English people expect free healthcare. It's ridiculous. No, Fumi will be teaching mainly Arabs, who will be speaking Arab languages. This is why I have her studying the adventures of Sinbad. And I think the permission will stand. Sit down.
Your daughter has to receive a full-time education. That is the law.
And she is receiving that. On Monday, she watches Obesity. Tuesday, Casualty on UK Gold. On Wednesday, she watches Cavity, Dr. Queen Medicine Woman. I mean, it's not fantastic, but it's very good for snake bites. On Thursday,
I'm sorry, Mrs. Masquerade, but if your daughter isn't able to attend school full-time, we're going to have to ask her to leave.
leave. We've paid. I tell you what is going to happen. You are going to change your lessons. Mathematics. You'll be teaching her conversion rates with special emphasis on the Middle Eastern currencies against the dollar. In history, we don't be teaching her anymore about this Black Death. It's ridiculous. Nobody gets that anymore.
But history is a very important subject.
I know. This is why you'll be teaching her the history of gynecological complaints in rich Arabic ladies.
And I suppose in geography we should give her an aerial photograph of Harley Street and ask her to pick out her own practice.
That's very good. I hadn't thought of that. Oh, you like that, would you? You like it for me, like it. Perfect. She'll be back in class on Monday.
But what about today? Is she staying today?
What subject are you doing?
Cookery? They're cooking liver and kidneys.
For me, why is this standing there? Get to class. Bye.
Brusque and straightforward, the character of Mrs. Masquerade displays the energy and passion immigrant African women devote to raising their children in a racist society. Coming from a society where class and race are not markers of access, such mothers had voluntarily migrated to the first world to give their children the best education possible in a rapidly globalizing world. their discovery of a well-entrenched range of obstacles in the path of their children, and the awareness of the vulnerability of children to such obstacles brought them to battle an educational system that lacks the will and resources to treat everyone as equal. New and energetic combatants to centuries-old battle, these mothers fervently paint a bright, vivid picture for their children, as does Mrs. Masquerade, drawing from a different cultural wellspring of values, personal identity, subjectivity, and aspirations. They hold up a model of their children's future until their children are forced to commit to the lifestyle, the professional career sketches. So if Fumi doesn't want to be a doctor, she'd better come around to being a doctor by the time Mrs. Masquerade finishes. If nothing else, that's what's going to bring her the kind of lifestyle the mother envisions for her. The big house and the spouse who's another doctor. Realists that they are, these mothers know that these visions alone will not reorder British or American reality or check the poor quality of education offered in the public schools in their district. And so they tap into pockets and networks of fellow African immigrants for information and immediately begin to work either to move the family to a district with good schools or to work overtime or multiple jobs to earn the money for the private school education for their children. Coming from cultures that value work, African women such as Mrs. Masquerade are not shrinking violets when it comes to working for the benefit of their children. In fact, work for them is an essential part of a woman's identity, valuable for the financial autonomy it confers and for its positive transformation of people into socially responsible beings. Through their work and life choices, they impart the message to their children that, quote, not working, end quote, is unacceptable, and failure to change one's social conditions is both contemptible and socially abhorrent. So the fresh energy and diverse community building strategies that these immigrant women bring to the battles against racism in their new communities will over time contribute while working with others to transform the dominant society along the lines we would all want to see. They will contribute in rolling back racism. Racial solidarity or rhetorics aside, many of them engage in the battle more because of their acceptance, which is a social obligation to transform the conditions of their new residences to make it a home. The question then is, to what direction are they willing to transform the society, and how do they want the societies to change? Now, at this point, I'm going to shift to some of the artists that I have identified to see how they are doing it. And I'm going to begin with the works of Chinwe Ogoroy. Researched Against the Background is the part of the Mask series. She has been engaged in a battle within her community in southern England, where she figures that the perception or conception of Africa is still less than to be desired. So the question is, how do you educate and change some of the attitudes and assumptions that people have? But much more importantly, how do you inscribe some of these values or iconographies within the landscape so that it becomes part of the everyday world in which she lives? Basically, what they are striving to achieve is to take from home, or the old home, the values and iconography and symbols that define the visual landscape and bring it within and into the new environment so that the new environment takes on salient elements of home. And it's only by doing that are they able to provide their children with a sense of belonging. Many of the children who are biracial, especially in the cases of Sokari Douglas Camp and Chukwogoroy, feel always as if they are an in-between culture, not totally British and not totally Nigerian. So caught in that particular complex, belonging to the two diverse and divergent societies, how do you as a parent bring them together so that the children are able to take pride in the two cultures even as they live within the same reality as their peers? So it's not a case of taking them over to Nigeria for them to get a sense of what their African heritage is and then bringing them back to London or to Suffolk where they currently reside so that they can continue living their everyday reality. The part of migration and transformation makes it imperative that you have to complicate this very existence and this very reality. It can no longer be separate. And the children becomes the focus that allows and pushes for those changes to occur. So some of the issues she began to come across were similar to the issues that the first generation of African artists had come across. Pejorative descriptions of Africa, which she then began to combat by painting a range of portraits as well as a range of compositional subjects that bring in what oftentimes are seen as typically African, in this case, masks, into her works. So in this particular one called Ebony Song Number 3, she uses the Baga mask from Burkina Faso as the basis of the template. So if you look closely at the background, you'll see the outline of the Baga mask reversed in ways that you could actually identify and see the form. Now, these are some of the masks that had been instrumental to reshaping European art and setting forward the modernism ethos in the works of Picasso, Matisse, and Klee. So Baga mask was very instrumental, and if people who know the Picasso's work, Demoiselle d'Avignon, would see elements of this mask in some of the women that he had painted. So she does a lot of portraits of people, investigations of masks. What is it about masks that are significant? Why is it that masks oftentimes terrify people? How do human beings wear masks even with their ordinary faces? Masks as a means of cloaking your emotions, masks as means of disengaging from conversations or people. So the notion and complexity of masks becomes something she works through in her works in very many ways. But the focus or the main symbols that are dominant in these works are the masks from different cultures of Africa. Now, she attained international attention because she was the first African woman to paint the Queen. And of course, if you were in England and British, painting the Queen is a big deal. It's like being invited to the White House to paint Obama and Michelle, but something very better because of the pomp and pageantry that is attached to the royalty and the royal family. So she was commissioned by the Commonwealth Office to paint the Queen. And this is an immigrant woman artist living in a place in southern England. And the question then arises, how did it happen? How did the Queen in Buckingham Palace in London know about this artist, who happens to be a woman and the mother, for her to be commissioned? And being commissioned to paint paint the Queen meant that you had to be with the Queen. She had 5 sittings with the Queen, in which she was in total isolation with the Queen, sketching her, painting her, getting to feel her mood, getting to capture some of her experiences in the work. How then she's able to use the Queen as a larger metaphor for what the Commonwealth notion stands for. On the one hand, we see the Commonwealth as steeped in the history of British imperialism and colonialism, but in the 21st century, when this particular work is done, the monarchy of Britain has undergone certain transformations, and now we are trying to recapture them as symbols of progress, whereas we are using the notion of progress to undermine some of the inequities that took place during the period of colonialism. That's one. The second element of this particular issue is how the empire strikes back. At the time the British sallied forth to all parts of the world to create the empire where the sun never set, they never believed that the nationals of those particular regions are going to come back. And not only are they coming back, they are demanding the redefinition of the United Kingdom societies and moving it from its axis of whiteness and Anglo-Saxon to a multicultural, diverse society. So, political actions that were set in motions in a different century, in a different period, historical period, are now taking on consequences that were unforeseen at the time they were planned. Now, the emphasis on the Queen comes from the fact that she was asked to submit her portfolio because she was doing the portrait of the Secretary General of the Commonwealth at the time. And this Secretary General, Chief Emeka Anyoko, is a Nigerian national, an Igbo, less than 40 miles from the home of Chinwechukwu Ogoroy. And so he was the one who had sought her out to do his portrait because within the new reality of United Kingdom where the Commonwealth headquarters is situated, there were artists and citizens and immigrants from different parts of the Commonwealth living in that area. And he, through the network that is created by immigration and transnational migration, had come to know about her. So he had requested for her to do the portrait. And in the process, had then asked her if she would like to submit a portfolio to compete with other artists for the opportunity to paint the Queen for the Commonwealth Jubilee celebration in 2003. And she was selected. I'm not saying that it was rigged, but she was selected. And the reason also that when you look at it from a professional level or angle, the two portraits are going to hang in what is called the Marlborough Room within the Commonwealth House. And so one could speculate that there was an attempt to create a consistency of style in the portraits that inhabit the room. So you have the portrait of Emeka Anyoko, painted by Chinwechukwu Ogoroy, which Her Royal Majesty unveiled when it was completed. And less than 2 years later, Emeka Anyoko was unveiling the portrait of the Queen, painted by the same artist. Now, being able to move into the higher echelons of society gave her greater cachet, that her work began to command a particular level of respect, which before it never did, which provided the platform for her to push some of the other work she's doing in ways in which to address and enter into a discussion with British society that there is a multiplicity of cultures living now in the British Isles, and these are all legitimate parts of the contemporary British reality. The other message it conveyed to the wider British public is that artists from different parts of the world can and do succeed and attain the level that is possible for them. However, she was able to attain that is not the focus of attention. What really is important is that it impresses on the new generation the possibilities that are there, and that they too, as immigrants, who may now are citizens, do belong and do have a stake in the society. So it becomes a way, using art, to knit the society and to create a new model of societies different from the past one where there were a lot of divisions. She does a lot of portraits, and she has done a lot of portraits of key British figures throughout England. But she also has abstract works. And for anyone who is very familiar with the British poetry, When the Moon Was Blood would know that it was a poem by G.K. Chesterton, speaking about the donkey. So she also uses some of her African sensibilities. She uses the African landscape to render some of the imageries that emanate from poetries, stories that are seen as indigenously British. So in this way, you subvert the divisions that were already in place and create a much more harmonious society. For me, this is one of the things that a lot of women artists, especially those who are mothers, are doing. So Carrie Douglas Cam says it best when she says, I am not into a pissing contest. And pissing contest seems to be a dominant feature of modern art in Britain. And so you want to ask her what exactly is this pissing context is. And it's a context in which the life-affirming element of art ceases to be of importance. Everybody is jockeying to make a wild statement in her view. And sometimes you can decide, I can create a work with elephant dung. Or I can take some rotten meat and put in a jar and stick there for people to look at. And at the end of it, you're asking yourself, what's the point of this art? What is it saying? And sometimes whatever dense meaning that it may be trying to convey doesn't quite come across in the ways that many of the mothers who are invested in the upbringing of their children want the art to speak. So for her, she's a sculptor. She welds. She moved into sculpture knowing that in her Calabari reality, women didn't sculpt. But she trained in England, and so she saw herself in a complex situation of using the opportunities available to her both to change and refashion her society, as well as use the values and the symbols of her society to refashion the new British society within which she lives. So she has this particular boat, Alaliaro, and she names them in Calabari. She will name them and they should give you the English translation, pushing us to expand the limits of our language. If we're able to think in 2 or 3 languages, we have expanded our conceptual scheme rather than narrowed it. So the Elariero prods people to question, what is it? It's a festival boat that was used during the centenary of the Buguma to chart the historical trajectory of the societies. The Kalabari live in 23 islands in the Niger Delta. And so before the Niger Delta exploded in the current situation that it is, there was a time when you use art and performance to re-choreograph history, to narrate the history, and to more indelibly impress the history into the imagination of the children. So during the ceremony, the festival boat is actually a dugout canoe, 2-tiered, and is sailing on shallow water, which requires some technological feat to accomplish. But the dugout boat also is a throwback to the period of the slave trade, whereby such dugout boats was used to take the goods off the ships and bring the trade goods into the interior, and oftentimes to ship the enslaved into the ship. So on the one hand, it has an iniquitous history. On the other hand, it can be used to re-choreograph history. And this was her first big attempt at metal sculpture. And at the extreme end of the helm of the boat, she mounted a spirit figure. For her, the spirit and the spiritual world is a very critical part of life. This was a child who was constantly being airmailed to England for schooling, airmailed back to Nigeria to live. She knows she knows modernity like any other person knows it. But she also knows that there's an aridity to the modern life without the spiritual component to give it the richness and the robustness that we need. So she began to explore the Kalabari notions of spirituality. What are the spirits? How do you engage the spirits? And one of her nieces, who uses dance as a basis for mediumship, began to show her how you can use dance to expand your consciousness. And she oftentimes talked about things that she sees and how she creates that she couldn't even explain, that you cannot codify in material, physical senses. So the spirits that she incorporates into the boat is designed to animate and activate the spirit of the search, searching for different islands that is habitable in which people live, functioning as a spirit of the community that enabled it to transform and survive over centuries. Then, when you move into the spirit, one of the key forms that really do come out is the masquerader. Most times, people just see the mask as a sculpture. And if you go to the Metropolitan Museum, you will see a mask, just a sculpture, sitting on a pedestal. But in the actual context in which they reside, mask sculpture is part of a multimedia ensemble. It's a full figure. And they are not known as masks, they are in fact known as spirits. So prodding the Kalabari spirit masquerading society reveals that Ekineba, a woman, was the originator of the masking tradition in Kalabari. But in the late 20th century, in which she began to work on the sculptures, she was being told that as a woman, you cannot be part of a masquerade society because you're a woman. But pushing into that history raises the question, how can it be that we invented it and we're no longer participants in this particular form? And I am going to claim it. And claim it she did. So she began to produce full-size masqueraders, or masked spirits. And this one is the Swordfish Masquerade. And the fascinating things about her works, monumental, they are now part of the landscape in the United Kingdom. This one is in front of the Hanover Park in Peckham. This one she called the Dandy Masquerade because struts around like a dandy, entices the women, dresses in very colorful terms, and goes on like a dandy, trying to entice women, which is part of the huge performance of the Ekine community. Okay. This is another one, Masquerade with Feathers. And then she moves from the masquerade and she fastens her attention on women. Ashwebi, or lace, sweat and tears. This group of 5 sculptures are in front of the British Museum in the what is called the Africa Garden, specially conceptualized for this location and designed to be placed on water. So the base of the sculptures is in the water, and then these women stand out. They wear green, which speaks to vegetation and ecology, and they have the pink sash. Now, this one gives you a clearer, sharper focus, but this one is at the University of Leicester in the Botanic Gardens. So what is Ashwebi? Again, Ashwebi is not Kalabari. So Kari has now moved to a different region of Nigeria to engage them in a conversation of the kind of work she's producing, knowing very well that there's a large constituency of Yorubas who are living in London, who have children, 2nd generation, 3rd generation British citizens. Now, the concept of Ashwebi is a concept of solidarity. When there is an event and you want to mark your solidarity with the organizer of the event, groups of friends will decide to wear the same attire. They're all going to come looking alike. And so it may be members of the Africana Studies Department of UMBC. So we're all going to come dressed in green. And the person also has other friends who will come in their own attire. So it's a mark of solidarity. But she's also looking at it, pushing the issue further, knowing that sometimes some people may not have the money to buy the attire, and the attires are pretty expensive, but they overtask themselves even though they lack the resources, which is why she called it lace. And when you talk of lace, you mean Austrian lace. You're talking of voile, very expensive fabric, but very impractical fabric because half of it is holes, okay? You have to have another fabric underneath to create some closure. But the Yoruba like lace, and so they deck out in lace. The bikers. This is a play on the bikers. So on the one hand, one could think of it as the biker community in England, the United Kingdom, but there's a phenomenon that has been spiraling out of control in Nigeria, which is what they call Okada. Because of the economic changes, and people cannot easily afford cars, there are no taxis, not enough buses, so people with motorcycles have become 2-wheel taxi drivers. So, and they go along in hordes, like a horde of locusts. And when the light changes red, they all clutter. And when the light changes to green, no car can pass because this swarm has to go first. And they're very dangerous because you are coming out of your car, you may knock somebody off their bicycle. And then the community of bikers will gather together and pounce on whoever pushed them down, push one of their bikers down. So she's also looking at this phenomenon, both of the biker community in the United Kingdom and the biker community in the context of Nigeria. So it's an ambiguous work, but one that is designed to undercut the notion of alienness. People and values and cultures are not as alien as we think they are. Because if we look at some of our own practices, you're going to find that other cultures have similar ones. So her message is more geared towards undermining the fissures that exist between people as they cross cultures and as they bring new values to different cultures. In this particular image, she goes back to the Niger Delta conflict, because what is happening now in the Niger Delta is a full-scale, full-blown civil war. And people will talk about, the guerrillas or the boys who are there. What doesn't come through is that many of them are university graduates. Some of them have their masters, PhDs. They are the ones controlling the issues that are going there, challenging the government neglect, having the basis and the mental scheme to challenge the multinational corporations such as Chevron and Shell that have been polluting the oil delta. So, and she happens to be from the area. Kalabari is within the midst of the delta, 23 islands that are there. Many of them, you can't live there. The gas flares ensures that there are acid rain. The vegetation is poisoned. And the oil spill cloak the water, that it makes the water unusable. So now I'm moving from Sokari Douglas Camp to the new works of Nen Okorie. Nene doesn't have a child yet, but she'll get there one day. But what she's actually doing is, for her, is drawing from the wellspring of cultural values, symbols that are part of her reality as ways of creating in her new location. She creates with ephemeral objects. This particular work, which she called Ashoke, part of the Ashoke series, is made with mud, clay on burlap. Now, this is another variation. And some critics have looked at it and talked about it as, because she focuses on clothes, they see it as making a metaphorical statement about skin and the role of cloth in concealing. That's not what she's doing. What she's actually re-choreographing is some of the debates that took place in Nigeria in the 1980s between the Yorubas and the Igbos. Shortly after the Civil War, and for years after, many of the Igbos were totally financially ruined. And that was the time that the Yorubas' opulence in wearing lace was at its height. And And so the Igbos had their own mode of dressing, which is called George. And the Yorubas at the time said, well, that's a kind of cheap materials, nothing to it. This is, if you really want to dress and be part of the high society, lace. Now, nobody ever asked the question, where is this lace manufactured? All in Austria. How does that add to the economy of the society? That's not the issue for the high society woman. But they have this fashion war going on. So then the Igbos decided, you think our own mode of dressing is not expensive? Given the fact that the George that they tie, you need about 8 yards of that, and they tend to be much more expensive than the 3 yards or 4 yards of the lace that the Yorubas would wear. So they decided we are going to have a lace war. So the Yorubas will dress in a particular way, they call it Irambuba. The Igbos will show up with their up and down. So while the Yoruba will use 4 materials, the Igbo will use 12 yards. 4 yards to 12 yards. And they created this particular event in Lagos in the late 90s, where when they came out, when they decided they were going to take on the Yoruba high society women, they came out in droves, all decked out in lace. And the Yorubas kind of were befuddled. Whoa, we didn't expect this to happen. Now, when one doesn't know some of the issues that she is bringing, one may tend to offer a particular interpretation that misses some of the cultural elements of the work. But once you begin to engage her in the objective, what you find is that she is again bringing from what she knows best and bringing those values to the table in the visual landscape of 21st century world, because she exhibits both in England, Europe, and the United States. Now, to end, the achievements of these women come from their engagement with issues of immigration and diaspora living, which they use to show and to exemplify some of what they create. They derive sharp artistic vision, confidence, and culturally nuanced visual idiolect. These then become the main ingredients to their success. The focus for them has always been how to weave some of their older Nigerian-based pre-immigration experiences with their new transnational type of experiences to create a new symbolic language of discourse for the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nzegwu, for that wonderful lecture and visual presentation. We will now take questions, and we ask that you please come to the mic so our speakers can hear you loud and clear. Any questions? Yes?
First, I'd like to just acknowledge and thank you for your existence as a strong African woman. I'm sure everyone here appreciate that as well. My question, you mentioned that in the clip, it mentioned that these African women who are migrants from Africa have such great specificity in the sense of what they want their child to become, doctors and etc. Do they, in a sense, do these kids, just like the artworks that they create, are they metaphorically representations of creating this newness and this women's superiority? And if so, what about the child that does not want to be adopted? Does that, in a sense, hurt their creation, or in a sense, this creating this newness that they desire when coming from African countries?
Okay. What they actually do, much as Mrs. Masquerade made it very clear, I want you to be a doctor. They're also very aware that the child may end up not being a doctor. But what they're trying to do is to instill a particular level of aspiration. Make it very clear to them, you can, and you should, and you can aspire to be a doctor. But you can change to be an engineer. They'll support you. They'll live with that. But you may decide, okay, I want to be a sanitation worker. Hell no, not in my house. So what I'm trying to say is that being a doctor becomes a metaphor for the particular kind of lifestyle they want for their children. Whatever profession you end up choosing, let it be one that will get you to that particular lifestyle, not necessarily being the doctor. So, but the comedic version of Gina Yashiro was to really harp on the doctor aspect. And she, with her mother, got that particular treatment. And she ended up being an engineer, not a doctor. And then flipped that around and became a full-time comic. At that time, the mother gave up.
We welcome questions, but yes, you must come to the mic.
Yeah. Hi. I have a simple question. In the beginning, you talked about giving birth, particularly one of the artists that you were presenting on. I was wondering if, when she left Nigeria and she was pregnant, what impact did birth have on her trade as an artist, and how did immigration factor into that in presenting her work?
Hold on. None of them left because they were pregnant. They became pregnant later.
Yeah.
Okay?
But how did the pregnancy impact their art? Did it
Okay.
change it in any sense?
Okay. For Chinwe Chukwuogoroy, becoming a mother and parenting really ate into her time, which was why she didn't come to full-time painting until 1988. And she had emigrated in 1975. So at that time, she had two little boys that she was parenting, which didn't leave her with much time. So she came back to it. So Carrie Douglas Camp incorporated her children into her art. Oftentimes, I met her in 1989, 1990 in Washington, D.C., and she came with her pushchair. Her kid was in the pushchair, which is a stroller, and she was pushing the kid along and directing how she wanted them to place her sculptures in the Museum of African Art at the mall. She would travel, and if she needed to feed the baby, just a minute, she'll go to a section, she'll breastfeed the child, and then come out. And then once the child is past the age of breastfeeding and needing the mother, the father takes over. So she has a very good working partnership with her husband. So having children didn't eat into her work.
We will continue to take questions, yes.
Good evening. Thank you for your lecture tonight. I wanted to ask a question about, well, I know your lecture was mainly on Africans that were raised or grew up in the diaspora and how they're incorporating their heritage and their values when they move to, I guess, the Western world or to Europe. But what are your thoughts
who are here and producing or who are also going back to Africa to produce?
Who are born and raised here and might want to relocate.
And wants to relocate? The artists? Most of the artists that I know who are born and raised here, their relocation to Africa had been temporary surgeons. And I do work with those artists, some of whom I know. But they are not part of this particular paper because the paper is focusing on the dynamics of and the actual process of transmigration. But some of the, to push the issue forward, some of them that I know did go there more to study some of the icons, the symbolism, the practices of art, and then having done that have come back to the United States, for example, and produced and have reworked some of the ideas in their work. This happened a lot during the 60s, especially during the civil rights, the Black nationalist movement era. Many of the artists took it as a duty to go to different parts of Africa to study the forms there and then come back.
My question is whether there are generational differences between the two artists you focus on, and if there are, how these generational differences affect and reflect their artwork. At the beginning, you make a critique of early female novelists, African female novelists, who were writing to reflect the reality of the time. They wrote their works. And I know that there are a new generation of African novelists who are departing or who have departed almost entirely from what the fourth generation female artists did, and not to undermine the solid foundation they laid. So if you can enlighten, maybe share the age of the two artists you presented and when they carried their painting, or how old their painting or artwork.
The youngest is the last artist, Nkiru. Sokari Douglas Camp and Chukwu Ogoroy. Chukwu Ogoroy is older than Sokari, but you would class them closer together than Nenna. In terms of what they take up, the stylistic differences are much more important than the generational differences. Their philosophical approach to art is similar, even though their themes and subject matters are different in the ways they approach art and the kind of messages they want to put out to the larger public. I tend to see them as having more life-affirming or social-affirming values than some of their male peers. Nena Okorie's, even when we come to her art is very, very grounded. It's very grounded in her reality of Nsukka and the environment and the kind of works that she's seeing. And she's bringing that into her work. So even though she is of a different generation, again, when you look at her works philosophically, it seems to ally with the aspirations that the two older women artists seem to aspire. When I pointed about the novelists, I did that because, and some of the theorists, for example, Molara, that in the first phase of writing about African women, there was a lot of positive elements. Some of the female affirming practices, and I'm thinking of people like Carmen Okonjo, who write about, and Felicia Kejuba. But then what happened was that within the context of African studies in the United States, a group of some Marxist trained began to challenge the fact that feminism needed to be the covering law thesis of explaining women's reality everywhere, and that in fact Africans were myth-making by talking about their traditions or practices that did give spaces and empowerment to women. Some of the writings of the novelists, I contend that they feature some aspects of the character of women, because no novelist, in a sense, can represent all the experiences of women, okay? So they are talking about specific types of women, specific types of personality, the kinds of ways those women respond. But even as you're reading their works, especially even in the works of Mariam Maba, her best friend, her life trajectory is radically different from Ramatoulaye. And if you look at the woman who pushed her out of the house, she's a different personality, whom is positioned in a way to be disruptive. But the fact is, they are both Wolof women. They are both Muslim women. They're speaking about the complexity of the society. But Mariam Maba was focusing on a particular facet, which as an author she has a right to do. She's telling a story. But Mariam Maba will not tell you that in the Wolof region, totally, this is how women always act. Within the context of Senegal, many of the women will say, we can see the truth in this personality, we can see the truth in this personality, give us the context, and we can tell you how some women will respond. But once you leave the context within which these novels were written, people don't have that flexibility or nuanced reading. They just take it and say, all African women are victims, or all African women do this. And they don't bring that richness of the society to their work. So I'm not trying to delegitimize the writings that they've done. What I'm saying is that the ways the global audience reads their novels makes it lose its complexity. And once it loses its complexity, they use that crude template and they map it on any African woman who happens to be standing by.
Dr. Nzegwu, I have a question about several things. The first is I'm interested in diaspora identities and to what extent they're embraced by, in this case, Nigerian immigrants, whether it's done as culturally distinct, which some may figure in isolation, or whether it's done with respect to alliances beyond Nigerians. And I would like for you, which could be an answer, if you will, to, in the beginning you mentioned that with respect to the first African diaspora text and the second diaspora text, you said the old is replenished by the new, and it complicates the cultural environment of both the United States and the world. Could you comment on those collectively with respect to how they affect the challenges that the discipline of Africana studies faces now as we try to use these often limited resources we have to meet the needs of all of these different constituencies?
I'm not sure whether I was strategically placed here to map out an agenda for the African and ensure that the provost works on it. It's a rather complex relationships. The ways in which, and I'm going to look at it in different ways. The new immigrants, you have a range of new immigrants. People of different ranges, people of different levels of understanding, people of different awareness of history. So, depending on situation, people deploy particular identities. So, they may have come here as Nigerian immigrants. But even in the context of being here as Nigerian immigrants, and if you study, there's a breakdown to the ethnic level, to the hometown level, to the family level, that it's one overlapping range of identities, and depending on which situation and what event they are attending, they affirm and display that particular identity. And if they begin to engage the larger American reality or African American reality, again, you find alliances, coalitions, convergences. Now, that's not to say you don't have conflicts. And I know oftentimes some scholars have focused on the conflicts between the Africans and African Americans. What they have missed is the intra-conflicts between the Africans themselves, which may even be much more virulent than that between the African Americans. So when you focus on that relationship, it depends sometimes on the value system. It could be the context where they live. But it doesn't mean that there are no alliances and no coalitions and that there's no convergence of interests. What I'm also saying is that the mere assertion of race doesn't get anything going. Because within a racist society, let's say in the United States or even in Canada or the UK, you can see the broad race differences. So you can talk about the system, it's exploitative, this has been done, and legitimate complaints. Within the context of Africa, it doesn't play that way. Your next door neighbor, your next door, take Rwanda for example. It was two people, same color. So race doesn't necessarily spark the imagination of the Africans because they are aware that their neighbors or their enemies are also of the same color. So you need something larger, something much more significant to hold on to. They are pushing, let's look beyond the race and the color, let's look at the character. Let's look at the objectives, let's look at the issues. Because race itself will not necessarily be the cement that holds. Because if it was the cement that holds, we will all be singing Kumbaya in Africa. And we are not. Okay? With regards to the Africana Studies Department, I'm going to leave that to your honorable chair to define. I'm not going to touch that at the moment.
We'd like to thank you from the bottom of our hearts, Dr. Nzegwu.
Thank you very much.
And once again, we thank all of the departments, the administrators, the staff. We had even representatives from the library and the McNair program and history departments and so on who dined with us earlier. Thank you, students and alumni, for your ongoing support, and we ask that you all have a pleasant evening and a safe ride home.